Self-control has been a major theme in our readings from the letter of James these last several Sundays. You've noticed we've had the Epistle of James has been in our readings, and that continues today and next Sunday. Indeed, self-control is a fundamental part of our spiritual growth, which puts us on the path to real freedom. Last week we were told to control and limit the words that come out of our mouths. Hurtful, hateful, and untrue words are like a destructive fire. So we must hold our tongues in check. And when we speak, speak out of wisdom and love so as to give life. In today's installment, we're warned to resist unruly cravings for pleasure. These manifest as greediness, lustfulness, and covetousness, and the like. These disordered urges cause people determined to get what they want, whatever that happens to be, to argue and to fight and to commit violence, even murder, to get them. And our reading from Mark today calls us to yet another restraint, the restraint of our desire for status. Back home in Capernaum from their trip to Caesarea Philippi, the disciples, having proclaimed their belief in Jesus as the Messiah, did something all too human. They began arguing with each other about which one of them was more important, which one was the greatest. Perhaps they were jockeying for power. Who would succeed Jesus after his death? Which seems awfully cold, doesn't it? Or perhaps better, they were simply feeling insecure. Sometimes we can fall into the mistake of valuing ourselves based on how we measure up to others. We see others looking and feeling great, with more things and more accomplishments than me, seemingly living their best lives, and it feeds my insecurities. Why can't my life be like that? Why can't I have more? Am I not good enough? The internet has made this a serious spiritual threat to our children, and especially little girls, by providing an endless scroll of comparisons. It is a poisonous thing. Our sense of self-worth must never rely on comparisons to others. Instead, we must anchor our identity to the gospel truth that each and every one of us is infinitely valuable, priceless. You, all of you, are infinitely valuable just as you are. That's not Father Michael talking. That's God's position on the matter. And Jesus' sacrifice on the cross sealed it. Well, Jesus caught wind of the disciples' competition of egos, and he proceeded to teach them an alternative posture and attitude. He said, "Whoever wants to be the greatest must be the servant of all." Self-control opens up a spiritual space for us to draw nearer to God. And our vehicle for that is prayer. Prayer is the fundamental way that we build and grow and live into our relationship with God. It is our essential relationship with God. And so it's very important that we approach it well. James connects the two for us. And he warns us very candidly that we often pray wrongly. He says, you do not have because you do not ask, and you do not receive because you ask wrongly. This is all about our prayer life. If we're asking for more things for ourselves than we really need, we're not operating out of God's will, but out of our wish fulfillment. It's akin to hedonism. Or we desire things that others have, but we can't have, perhaps can't afford. And so our prayers are more like coveting. And neither are effective. True prayer requires us to discern between what we truly need and what we simply want, between what is good for the world and what is good only for me. Do I really need more stuff while so many of my neighbors have very little? Do I need 5,000 more square feet of storage when so many of my neighbors are homeless? This kind of discernment, you see, directs how we pray. True prayer submits our real needs and those of others. It asks for strength and wisdom to exercise restraint. And prayer, of course, is so much more than asking for things anyway. In prayer, we also give God praise and thanks. We make our confessions and receive His forgiveness. In prayer, we also listen quietly for God's saving word. True prayer asks not to get our own way, but to understand and follow God's way, which is always better. We must hold our ideas about what God's answers might be to our prayers ever so lightly. That's true prayer because it trusts God. This humble submission puts us in the exact right posture and attitude to do as He directed, to be His servants, just as He said. And this servanthood keeps us centered in God's will. To be a servant of the Lord is the greatest occupation we can have, the greatest status we can attain, because it centers us on what endures for eternity. God's own self, His love for us and through us, and His promises. As Father Guido observed at a recent men's Bible study, we're like clay that a potter uses to make something wonderful and useful. But that can only happen if the clay is centered on the potter's wheel. Uncentered, we wobble and then fall apart. Jesus is the potter, and we are the clay. And when we are truly centered on Him, our souls thrive and we experience real freedom and joy. Well, the paradox is obvious. That restraint, the more we restrain ourselves, the more we exercise restraint and self-restraint, the more freedom and happiness we experience. Centered, we're free from the anxiety that comes from being overly attached to things that are passing away. Things like money, status, pleasure, and so much more. Sephora, for instance. We're marked safe from the chaos of the world that swirls about us, and the devil flees from us. Have you ever known someone who could afford anything anyone could ever want, way more than they actually needed, and yet they choose to live modestly for themselves while giving generously to others? Do you know anyone like that? They share what they have with their church and with others in need. They sometimes do jobs well beneath their qualifications simply because it needs to be done, and that's what servants do. Why do they do it? If you know someone like that, and I bet you do, then you recognize in them an uncommon, extraordinary, God-given freedom and love. And where does that come from? It comes from being centered in servanthood. Don't we all want that? Don't we all need that?